Hello, and welcome to another FHIR for Developers tutorial video. My name is Gino Canessa, and today we're going to get into accessing FHIR servers protected by the SMART authorization framework. I'm going to mix up the format a little bit here. I'm going to try and do this as a series of shorter videos, just because there's a few sections and some of it might be repeated. So let me know in the comments or Zulip or wherever if that's better or worse, whatever you think on that. I appreciate it. So with that said, let's jump right in. The first thing we want to do is kind of establish what we're going to do in this project. And this is, again, going to be another tutorial project. So we're just going to use a .NET Core CLI to get going. And that way we don't have to worry about any of the UI pieces kind of getting in the way. But we want to start by understanding what is the SMART framework. And I did a short video on this a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into too much depth here. But again, I'm going to start with the specifications. So SMART Application Launch Framework Implementation Guide. And as always, there's a link in the GitHub repo here. So I'm going to start reading through here and see what it is. Now we can see it's talking about the different use cases for applications that want to access a server. So we've got patient apps that launch standalone, patient apps that launch from a portal, provider apps that launch standalone, and provider apps that launch from a portal. So we're going to go ahead and do something that's focused on a single patient. So we can call it a patient app, perhaps, or we could call it a provider app just for tutorial purposes. I don't know which will be more useful, but we can get into that later. But we're definitely going to do a standalone because we're not going to wrap all this in EHR and everything else for now. So that helps us establish kind of our framing for this. Some different things about app protection. We don't care too much right now. Same thing for public and confidential apps. Again, I think I covered that, but it's just if you're able to protect a client secret or not. So during registration of the application, if you generate a secret, can you keep that from the user? In this case, we can, but I don't know if it will make a difference as we go forward. We need to register with an EHR. Now, to get around this step, what we're actually going to be doing is using the Smart App Launcher. And again, I'll have a link to it. And I mentioned this briefly before, but this is a portal for simulating all of these, all of the functionality you need to develop Smart on FHIR apps. And so we'll use this, which doesn't require pre-registration. And then once we have everything up and running, we can consider if we want to take that the next step and register against another server just to validate everything works the same. So here we're going to get into, there's the two launch sequences. And the first one is the EHR session, so that we can just skip over. And then we have the standalone sequence. So this is what we're going to be interested in here. And we can see we have our app, and that's what we're going to develop today here. We need to talk to a FHIR server to get metadata so that we can get these OAuth endpoint URLs, and then we do a redirection. Now already we're not really going to be doing a redirection because we're doing a C# app. So redirect in the sense of sending a user there, yes, but we'll have to make sure we can launch the web browser and everything else. And then this particular flow ends here just going to the auth server. And it picks up here, so you can see now we're back at the auth server. So before we started with just the FHIR server, and now we have the auth server. And we're going to go through this authorization, and then we're going to get a code. And that code we can use to get an authorization token, there we go. So we have the authorization code, which we get an access token. And then we use that access token back in the FHIR server. So it feels a little complicated, but if you've ever been through an OAuth workflow, so if you've launched something that wants access to your GitHub, or something that wants access to, log in via Google or Facebook or anything else, that you kind of go to that other login screen, log in there, and then go back. That's what the SMART workflow is going to look like. So we can see here we have all kinds of good info that we'll get into after. But I think we want to continue with getting set up. Now that we kind of understand what we want to do, that sounds like the next good step. So in this case, we're going to create another repository, and we'll call this FHIR CS Smart and Local. Do it that way there. Now, the reason for that, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit just from the problem, is that we get here, you can see there's a redirect back to the app redirect URI. So that's this step right here. So what's happening is that after the user authenticates, that's a web page, and they're just going to send them back. And so there's a couple of different options we can go, and we'll explore probably other ones in future videos. But for today, what we're going to do is say we're going to use a local web server that's running in our application so that we can get this code back and do something with it. So this feels like a good name. So this is a tutorial for accessing smart FHIR servers via C# and .NET Core. Oops. That sounds pretty good. With a local web server for redirection. That sounds even better. And we'll leave it public, and we're going to go through the same things. We've done this before a couple of times. So we're going to create our repository. And what do I have here? Oops, wrong directory. There we go. So here we can see we've got nothing of note. Our other repos that we have existing. We'll copy our URL and clone it, and then move into that directory, which is just empty, and by default we have this master branch. So I've done this before here, and I'll just pull one over here so you can see. Again, I have this kind of template directory where I keep a basic gitignore, license, readme, all those kind of shells, just files, so I don't forget to add them. And I'm just going to paste them here. So with that done, if I look again, we have all these default files. So again, the gitignore, it just has a basic, since we're doing .NET Core, this has all the normal C#, Visual Studio Code, exclusions, just so we're not pushing up, our debug folders, our bin folders, things like that. And then I always put these at the end, /temp/secret/local to make sure those don't accidentally get pushed up. License is just an MIT license, and this is just a template file so that we can do this. And we'll just copy this from my outline here and say this is what we want to do. We want to access a smart FHIR server and use a local web server for redirection. And so we'll add just a note here, C#, .NET Core CLI, and we'll start with that. Perfect. We can actually close that one. And if we come back here, we can push from command line. And there's actually this add origin we don't have to do because we already have the origin. So we can just pull these last two parts. And we'll paste anyway. And it did not like that for some reason. Let's copy all three, paste anyway. Branch rename fail. Oh, I forgot to git add dot git commit -m initial commit. Oops, lowercase m on this guy. There we go. And now we should be able to pull our last two and paste. The joys of live. Perfect. So now you can see we switched from master to main, which is what we want, and then we push this up. So if we look at git branch -vv, we can see we're on main, and it pushes to origin main, and everything's synced at initial commit. So that's good. we're in a good spot right now. What we want to do next is go ahead and add some NuGet packages that we know we're going to need. Now, obviously, it's pretty common to just start developing and then add them as you go, but I wanted to shift all of these into one video just for simplicity. So the list is going to be there in the GitHub repo, and all the commands are there as well, but I'll go through and explain each one as I do it. So the first one we know we're going to want is our FHIR R4 package. So this is just adding, oops, we never actually created our project. I skipped a step there. We probably need to do that first. So, as usual, we want to make a source directory, and we can go ahead and list the templates so that we can look again and make sure what we want to do. Now, we're going to have a local web server, and so there are all of these like web templates and things like that that would work pretty well, but there's some kind of restrictions that you run into about long-running processes and different things like that, because these are supposed to be running as things in a web context. So I generally prefer to actually just make a console app and then add all of the packages I need to it, and so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to create a console app and add these packages. So we want .NET new, and we can call this Smart Local. Oops. And we need to do a console named Smart Local, and we want to output in the source directory. And that should run. Perfect. So now if we cd into source, we actually have our CS project, and we can start adding our packages. So again, the first one we're going to add is just the HL7 R4. Again, we're going to do everything with release 4, which is kind of the most current release, and that's the FHIR package we use for it. That's the we've gone through that before. Now, one of the things that I just mentioned was, even though we're using a console app, we're going to need a web server. And so we can actually add the .NET Core, the web server Kestrel, by just adding a few packages. So this first one you can see is Microsoft ASP.NET Core app. So this is the same package that gets added, and if we scroll up, if we do, for instance, a .NET Core web app, this is the base that it uses for it. So that'll give us the core functionality we need to start adding the web server in. The next package is just this one for being able to configure cores. And cores is, what is it? Cross-origin resource sharing, I believe, is the check. And let's see if we just say, what is cores? Yes, cross-origin resource sharing. This is just a security layer, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's a check that web servers run when someone's making a request to see where is that request coming from. So if someone's browsing your website and wants to pull an image file, for instance, that should be okay. You have a website and you want an image from it. If someone on a different website wants to load images from your web server, you often don't want to allow that, because then people are using your bandwidth and kind of using you as a content provider. And so this cores is how you set that up. By default, there's a lot of things that will be denied, and just as we're testing, we want to make sure that we're not running into them. The errors that come back can be kind of hard to trace through, so that might be something else for a future video too, is just a quick demo on seeing them. But a lot of times you'll just see things like request failed, and that's it, because it doesn't log too much more info. So we want to make sure that we have cores and we can configure it so that we can set it up the way we want to. The next one here is ASP.NET Core Razor Design. And this is for compiling Razor stuff, pages, I guess, but it's not just pages. We need it because when we start adding some of the controllers and things that we want in our web server, we need this to make life easier for us. The next three are all kind of related, and it's these Microsoft extensions configuration. And so these are just exactly what it says, that it's extensions that you want in order to support better configuration. So in this case, it's we're going to add, and we can add them in this order so that it makes sense. But you can see the first one we're going to add here is configuration JSON. And this lets us have a file called appsettings.json. And the web server by default puts a lot of these settings in here. So we definitely want to be able to use that file so that we mirror everything again from the main. And what I found is helpful is actually to add this other one, environment variables, as well. And that just lets you do overrides if you're doing things in like Docker images or Kubernetes clusters or things like that, that you can more easily set environment variables than you can change configuration files. And so this lets you deploy those types of things easier. We may not need it, but again, I'm just kind of going through this set all at once and trying to cover everything we need. The last one is this system command line dragon fruit. You can see it's in alpha right now, but I've already been using it for quite a while and it's very stable. And this is actually extensions that they're planning to add to the command line in general in .NET Core. And so it's just kind of it's a very nice thing for now, and it will become standard at some point in the future. So with that, we have our project. Just to make sure, we will open it in code once before we end this part. We can see we have our project. We can see it's supposed to say hello world. And oops, we want to add the build assets, and then we want to build and run. And so just to make sure, it does say hello world. Perfect. So we have a project with all of the NuGet packages we could possibly need, and it does build and run. So I think I'm going to end this video here just to make these smaller bites, and then we'll pick up in the next section, which will be kind of how to discover the configuration of the smart server. So again, that's just the basic setup to cover this project, and I'll see you in the next session. Thanks.